Hello, everybody. Welcome to Spiritual Awakening 101. My name is Jerry Yakov, and I'm your host. I'm also a student and teacher of metaphysics. Metaphysics is the study and the practice of spiritual matters, spiritual identity in a world that is more form than spirituality or metaphysics. The physical world is a place that we navigate with our spiritual identity. And when we transfer in our minds our physical identity for the true metaphysical, spiritual identity with which we are endowed, then the lifetime that we experience here in the world is made more light, more joyful, and more purposeful, and certainly more fulfilling. Today I'm going to read from Science of Mind magazine. This is the April 2020 issue. And I'm also going to make reference to step 3 in the 12 steps from AA. The third step, particularly, says that we make a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand God. Well, this decision, of course, is pivotal. And that's consistent with what I had just said about living in the physical world, but as a spiritual being rather than merely a physical being. So, living in the world means doing everything that's normal, but doing it with an attitude of spiritual oneness. I and my brothers and sisters are one. I and God are one. And the God of my understanding is love. So the love that I am experiencing within my mind and within my heart, I then take out into the world to the best of my ability and with the help of my higher power. And I interact with people consistent with God's will, not my own. That's step 3. I've made a decision to turn my will and my life over to God. And in exchange for that, I am transformed. I am an enlightened being in that moment. There's really no hierarchy of enlightenment. In the moment that I feel totally connected with you and with my higher power and my true self, I am enlightened. Now, that may come and go depending on my willingness to turn my life over to God. But the truth is that I am always enlightened and simply forget at times, remember at times, and forget and remember. And those that are truly masters uh, don't forget. They remember all the time. Well, here's a small article in this magazine by an author. Her name is the Reverend Jane Beach. She is a minister, an author, an artist, and she writes with the title of this article, Right Now is a New Beginning. And I'll quote, of course, from her article and make comments as we go. Right now, in this moment, I can choose a new beginning, intentionally creating the life I want to live. My logical and opinionated mind has formed filters through which I see the world. Filters of judgment and guilt have had a subtle but quite real negative effect on my life. Well, here she's making reference, of course, to the ego. The ego would identify ourselves when we're in that attitude of ego as physical beings, a body amongst bodies in a world of form and time. However, the metaphysical truth is, as I said earlier, we're spiritual beings having a physical experience, having a human experience. So she's saying here that depending on the filter, whether it's spiritual or egoic, she's going to have a experience in life of judgments and guilt through the ego, and it's a negative effect on her life. She goes on, because I become what I repeatedly do, my actions speak volumes. If I repeatedly complain, I've become a complainer. If I constantly notice what's wrong, I'm a fault finder. If I continually give others space to speak their opinion, I'm open-minded. If, over and over again, I look for what's right, I'm an optimist. Well, here she's talking about her choices and her behavior patterns. The thinking precedes the choices precede the behavior patterns. But as a package, that triumvirate, if you will, the thinking and then the choices and the behavior all make up our life and the experience of our lives. Now, we want to align with the true self. The true self thinks with God, Spirit, Christ, Buddha. The false self thinks with ego, judgment, complaining, fault finding. Well, she goes on. No matter what I say, my actions declare who I am. Self-awareness is both humbling and empowering. Beginning now, and here's the vow that she makes, I will quit complaining about what I don't have and gratefully focus on all I have. I'll trade negative self-talk for words of self-encouragement and optimism. Well, here you see that she is practicing step 3. She makes a decision, she makes a vow to turn her will and her life over to the spiritual, Christ Buddha-like, Tao-like nature, rather than the egoic complainer and the one who is comparing what I don't have to what other people seem to have. So she's trading the negative self-talk, the thinking, for words of encouragement and optimism. And that certainly would be a spiritual, metaphysical decision and a transformation. Well, she goes on. I'm ready to release gently my judgments and guilt in order to see the world with acceptance and love. Surrendering the old, I create room for the truth to make itself known. The changes that come with new beginnings are ongoing. Some past situations and relationships are no longer a fit for who I am becoming. I've become uncomfortable with people I once wanted to be around. The job I prayed for now feels like a mismatch. The universe supports the changes in me. Doors are opening on my behalf. It's time to walk through them. Well, here she's identifying time and form, which is impermanent. And certainly there are changes within the context of time and space and form. So what may have been a fit, comfortable, uplifting, now through time and space and changes in attitudes, feels like a mismatch. But what she's saying is, I'm confident the doors are opening on my behalf. I look to my spiritual nature, which is always being fed by God, by love, by ideas of opportunities, of possibilities. And these ideas of possibility are infinite. And there's always the next job. There's always the next relationship. What I have to be sure of is that I'm bringing my highest self to the next job and to the next relationship. Otherwise, I'll be repeating over and over again with the same ideas in my own mind, the previous experiences, which are mismatches. So my new thinking, my new thought in Christ and Buddha and Tao bring more light, bring more fulfillment. That's the nature of the universe. It's always seeking to uplift us. It's always seeking to renew us and to make sure that we're blooming as the sun always shines on the plants and the flowers and gives them the opportunity to bloom in their highest and most beautiful way. Well, that's the nature of the universe. That's the nature of this teaching. What we want to know is that everything is for our good. Even what seems at the moment to be a negative circumstance, can always be transformed in our thinking and then consequently in our experience to one from negativity to infinite possibilities. Well, she goes on, my purpose is to be the person I'm capable of being. I'm the only one who can be me, and the world would be incomplete without me. With every choice I make, both positive and negative, I grow into my potential. And here's an interesting word, potential. Our potential is Christ Buddha. That is, we are becoming the Christ. We are becoming the Buddha nature. We are becoming the ideal. God created us as the ideal. And through our own experiences, both as a soul in previous lifetimes and a soul in this lifetime, we may have taken on negativity. We may have experienced from other people what we would think was a lack of love, a lack of appreciation, a lack of support, and we became um, downtrodden. But there's always the opportunity to look within first, always first, to the God of our understanding, to God itself, which is love and light, and be uplifted. Then people outside ourselves begin to take on that same appearance because it begins within our own minds. Now they look like they're filled with love and light. Even the ones who are seemingly negative, I don't take them as seriously. I recognize that I'm accountable only to a higher power, and I am following only God's laws. And somehow the universe then rolls out, if you will, a carpet consistent with for me to walk on that's consistent with my commitment to my higher self, to my better angels. I am one of the better angels. I encompass them and I share them and see other people as their better angels. Here she says, I don't need to live up to anyone else's expectations. Instead, I'm becoming my authentic self in my own time and my own way. I am enough, and I matter in the world, just as I am. Every moment counts as I consciously change the flow of my life. Am I worth a new beginning? You bet I am. So are you. Well, I think this is a delightful article. Reverend Jane Beach. She can be contacted on Facebook, facebook.com/Jane Beach, Beach. And I really appreciate this particular article. And I want to emphasize again the importance of turning our will and our lives over to the care of God. And then step 11 of the 12 steps suggests that we ask, what is God's will? And we ask for God's power to carry that out. We can't go wrong that way. God's will be spoken to us. It's a still small voice, but if we listen in the quiet and in the stillness, we will hear it and we will be guided, just like a GPS system. God's positioning system tells us where to go, what to do, what to say, how to behave, and with whom we are to behave. And underneath all of the how-tos is a sense of satisfaction. We aren't coming from a sense of scarcity. We aren't coming from a sense of neediness, codependency. That would be the antithesis of God's will and God's power. We are an expression of God, God in its entirety. There's nothing missing. There is no space where God is not. There is no space where I begin and God ends. There is a complete extension. It's a oneness. So if you're willing to practice that, and of course that's what I teach is the practice. Forgive people, love them, remember who they are. They are as much as we are the Christ, the Buddha, and the Tao, and the Krishna. Whatever God of your understanding makes the most sense and resonates for you. See those people that way as well. Because if we don't, then we can't see ourselves that way. As I think of another person, I must be thinking of myself because those ideas are either originating in my mind negatively and critically about them, and so they overshadow my mind where they originated, or I think positively and I think lovingly of other people because that originates in my mind, and I think positively and lovingly within my own mind of myself. Ideas don't leave their source, and I'm the source of the ideas that I then project outwardly, that I then transfer outside and see a pictorial or an outside picture of exactly what it is I'm thinking and how I'm thinking. So there's always an easy way to tell whether I'm engaged with my higher power of love, of God. Simply look outside. How am I acting with people? How are they acting with me? What is the general nature of my life? Do I feel that it's curving upward, in those graphs, those sales graphs? Is it going upward and growing? Or is it going downward? If it's going downward, it doesn't mean anything except to reconnect with my higher power, a new beginning, as that article mentioned, in this moment, in this instant. And then the circumstances don't necessarily change in the instant, but I view them differently. It's a re-imaging. It's a way of reframing. And it also is a way of reframing my past, as well as my expectancy of the future. Reframing in a spiritual sense is very important because I'm doing it consistent with God's infinite intelligence. I'm not going to do it with my limited intelligence, finite mind. I'm going to do it with God's infinite mind and omniscience. That way, I'm always looking through the lens of the universe at what's powerful and what is uplifting and what is going to happen for mine and everyone else's best outcome. I wouldn't know what that is. There are so many factors involved from the past, the present, and the future. But the omniscient one does know, and the omniscient one only wishes us the best, as any parent wishes for their children. We are the children. God is the Father, Mother God. And in that creative relationship of parent and child, we are the inheritance. We inherit all the good, all the love, all the potential that we are meant to have. And we share that with other people. And in the sharing of that with other people, we know our purpose. It's so important to be living life consistent with one's purpose. That's the only reason, really, that I teach these lessons, because I feel it's part of my purpose as a teacher of God. You have a ministry. Your ministry involves the people in your life, the ones that are most around you, and even the ones that are casually around you that you see infrequently. We're always being looked to as the minister, and everybody is our congregation. Shakespeare put it a little differently. He said, all the world's a stage, and everyone has their part. But I would expand on that and say, okay, but what's the meaning and purpose of the part that I'm playing on the stage? And I discover through the teachings of Christ and the teachings of Buddha and the Tao and so many other wisdom paths that my purpose or function on the stage is to be all that I can be my best angels. And my best angels are always giving me cues uh, from the behind the curtain, so to speak, my next line. God tells us what to say. God writes the lines. We deliver them. We're the messenger. And that's step 12 of the 12 steps. When we have a spiritual awakening, we recognize that we will then share as a messenger with others, those who are still suffering. So we're going to practice these principles, these lines that we're to say, these attitudes that we're to adopt. We're to express them in a way that uplifts ourselves and others. That's our function on the stage. And then what happens, of course, when life ends in terms of the play and the body that we inhabit is we lay down the costume, which is our body, and we're back as a soul in heaven. Now, we may be sent back onto a stage with another costume, but we have realized and never will lose the progress that we've made on this stage and in this costume. And that's why the Eastern philosophies are so clear about karma. We want to make sure that the karma we're building now, we take with us, of course, into the next iteration or rebirth. And that rebirth will be higher and higher and higher, as Jesus and Siddhartha had higher and higher rebirths and became ultimately the Christ and the Buddha. And the living Christ and the living Buddha is immortal. And we, of course, share in that immortality. We don't share in the costuming. That is impermanent, but that's neither here nor there because we aren't attached. We know once we're spiritually awakened that we aren't the body. I said that earlier, I think at the beginning of this video seminar, this that we are the mind, we are the soul, we are the decision that we make, we are the stand or the vow that we make, and that is carried from rebirth to rebirth until our work is done. Now, there is a greater force that decides when the work is done, and we abide by that trustingly and with faith. That's quite all right. But in the meantime, we want to be learning constantly. What is it that our highest angels are cueing us to say? What is it that God itself is cueing the angels, which are cueing us to read as our lines? We know they're loving lines. We know they're happy. We know that they're going to be uplifting for us and for others. And we know the bigger picture, even if it isn't a specific time and space picture, because we're really dealing with fourth dimensional wisdom here. And in fourth dimensional terms, I can't know what it is that is happening at the level of miracles, at the level of transmutation and transformation. But what I do know is that I feel it here at the three-dimensional level. I feel happier, more joyful. I smile more often. My forehead is more serene. My eyes are clearer. I'm more patient. I'm more tolerant. Am I perfect? Well, I have to admit, I'm practicing, and practice means that perfection is still in my future. I know that. And in the meantime, I don't berate myself or beat myself up because I know that, God doesn't condemn me. God doesn't berate me for my mistakes or my missteps. What God does is says, here, my child, follow me, follow my wisdom, follow my better angels that I've sent to guide you. Listen to them. And when you make a mistake, it feels like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's okay. I promise you, in the scheme of eternity, it doesn't mean anything. Eternity is an awfully long time, and we have eternity to share with each other in heaven. And it's kind of a little microcosm here on the earth where we can more consistently experience heaven here while we're experiencing being on stage and delivering our lines with the best of intentions, with the highest of ideals. That's the important thing. There have been many, many ideals exemplified. Mahatma Gandhi, I think, was one. Martin Luther King was one. Did they make mistakes as humans? I imagine that they did. And there are always biographies written which will go into more detail about the ups and downs of their lives. But ultimately, they were true to the infinite purpose to which they were serving. Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, these are examples of people that I like to think about. Jesus Christ. a wonderful example. There are so many others, of course. But in the West, we follow by and large Jesus. Moses is an example for the Jewish faith. Moses was a prophet. Moses followed, God's directions, and he was told, "Here are the lines that you're to speak, and here's who you're to go and speak to, Pharaoh, and you're to tell him to let my people go, free the Jews, free the Hebrews from slavery." Well, all of that meant so much at that time on earth. But the echoes of that, the reverberations, are still extending 2,000 years later, 5,000 years later. Doesn't matter what timeline you use, you recognize that the echoes, the energy, the vibrations of the Moses and the Jesus and the Siddhartha and the Buddha and Krishna, all of them are still reverberating within our own minds today. And we're to carry that on and extend those reverberations and those echoes and that energy. That's our function and that's our purpose. Well, I'm looking at the time here. We have a couple minutes left. Let me just share again from this particular magazine. It has for today, April 5th, a wonderful concluding affirmation. And it says, "Despite outer appearances, something is moving in the unseen for my greater good." Isn't that wonderful when we read something and it's consistent with what we have been talking about? The universe is moving in unseen ways for my greater good, for your greater good. This is the nature of the universe. The universe spelled with a capital U, not the small universe that you find maybe just within your own, as we say in 12 step, your own hula hoop. That's way too small. We want to start flying with eagle's wings and soar. None of the sparrow's wings. Nothing against sparrows. God loves and feeds the sparrows just like he feeds and sustains the eagles. But for metaphor purposes, we want to soar. And the higher we soar, the greater we see the vista, the greater we see the entire picture. And isn't that what it's all about? Seeing the entirety rather than the egoic, small vision that would just affect me. That's ego. But we want to know from a viewing point how we can best affect the entire world, the entire universe, all the galaxies, right up to heaven itself. Well, thank you so much for being with us. I'll close this particular video with shalom, peace, namaste, and God bless.